Salutations, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland, and here I am on Grosvenor Square in London. Well, and behind me you can see the Biltmore Hotel, formerly the Millennium Hotel. So the Millennium Hotel closed a couple of years ago. Major renovation work was undertaken, and the Biltmore opened on this site yesterday. So the Millennium Hotel is best known as the place where Alexander Litvinenko went for a cup of tea. And if you had a cup of tea there, you might be saying, tastes like polonium-210. So within hours of that, he fell very ill. He was so gravely ill, he was rushed to hospital, went into intensive care. He'd been vomiting uncontrollably, and that was November 2006. He died about 3 weeks later. The doctors, they later discovered that he'd been poisoned with polonium-210, but it was too late. This radioactive substance had taken hold on him, and there was nothing they could do to save him. The NHS threw everything they could at it, but that was that. Buried in Highgate Cemetery. Shortly before he died, he converted to Islam, and he released a statement shortly before he died saying, "I can hear the angel of death beating his wings," and so forth. And he accused one Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin of having ordered his death, as in the president of Russia. So what's the whole story? Well, Litvinenko was born in the Soviet Union, as it then was, in, I'm trying to remember, about 1963. And he did his compulsory military service in the Soviet army. And he later joined the Komitet Государственной безопасности, the Committee for State Security. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, that later became the FSB, Федеральная служба безопасности, as in Federal Security Service. So, and he was very perturbed by what was going on. He claimed the FSB was sometimes being hired to assassinate business executives by rival business executives. And this was not what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be providing internal security. There's this misconception that the FSB is a worldwide organization. It's not. You'll probably think of Служба внешняя разведка, as in external intelligence agency, which operates outside the Russian Federation. And there's also Главная разведка управления, which is the main intelligence directorate, GRU. The GRU is part of the army, and the GRU has a more military attitude, as in go and kill, whereas the SVR is more like gathering intelligence, compromising material, blackmail, whatever, is rarely killing people. But anyway, someone had ordered him to bump off Boris Berezovsky, this Russian oligarch. And he said, we can't do that, that's just not within our remit, there's no national security reason to kill him. And he tipped off Berezovsky. Berezovsky is very grateful to him and paid him some money. So it was a relationship that was lasted the end of his life, and in the end cost Litvinenko his life. So Litvinenko became increasingly disenchanted with corruption in high places, and some of the Russian security service is being heavily involved in all this. And then he was down in Chechnya. In 1994, there was an insurrection in Chechnya, and 1996, the Russian army had been largely defeated by tiny Chechnya. It was a horrific humiliation for such a mighty country. Only 5 years earlier, the Soviet Union still existed, and Russia, in the Soviet Union, had been considered to be the second mightiest country on earth. By 1996, it couldn't even control its own territory. This very small area, comprising perhaps 2% of the Russian population, without any tanks, any artillery, any planes, any helicopters, had defeated the Russian army. What happened to the might of the Russian army? There was a truce. But 3 years later, several apartment buildings in Russia were blown up, and hundreds of civilians were killed in Moscow and various cities around Moscow. That was August and September 1999. It was just after Putin was appointed prime minister. Boris Yeltsin was still president. And the Chechens who'd set off bombs in other parts of Russia, who'd taken hostages, deliberately killed civilians and so on, they had never disputed it, that they'd carried out these attacks, and often bragged when they carried out these attacks. But the apartment block bombings in 1999, they universally said, we did not do that. And why would they? Because they already had everything they wanted. They had de facto independence. The Russian army was withdrawn. Chechnya was being run more or less as an Islamic emirate, and that was that. The Chechens got their own language. They're Sunni Muslims, almost without exception. That's that. They were conquered by Russia around about 1800. So why would they start a conflict in the most provocative manner? Anyway, so Litvinenko said he had information, and very few of the security services knew that the FSB had done it. that Putin had ordered them to blow up these buildings in order to incense the public and provide a pretext for an invasion of Chechnya. And I know legally Chechnya was still actually the territory of the Russian Federation. So it went ahead, and he said it was done in the most cat-handed manner, the apartment bombings in the Russian parliament. There had been an announcement that a bomb had gone off in Voronezh, if I got this right, and no bomb had gone off in Voronezh. A few days later, an apartment building did blow up in Voronezh. So Litvinenko said they obviously planned to blow up this block of flats. They got the date wrong when they're going to do it. They announced it, a bomb attack which hadn't happened. And despite having announced a non-existent attack, they went ahead and carried out that attack a few days later. And even some FSB agents were arrested by the police putting explosives under a block of flats. The FSB people showed their FSB cards and were released by the police because the FSB were obviously going around in mufti, in plain clothes. And then the government couldn't get its story straight. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we venture to deceive. Claiming there were sacks of sugar, it was a drill. No, there were real bombs, it wasn't a drill, and kept contradicting themselves. So it was completely chaotic and imbecilic. But anyway, he was horrified that the Russian government would deliberately kill hundreds of its own civilians in order to start a completely avoidable conflict. But that was that. But this time the Russian army was prepared. The attack went ahead and was largely successful, although the fighting lasted for several years. I mean, Chechnya is more or less at peace now. Now, Ramazan Kadyrov, who rules Chechnya. Remember, he and his father, they've been Moscow's arch enemies. And they then did a deal. They switched sides, and they're now less, Putin's viceroy in Chechnya, saying he would like to kill anyone who criticizes Putin and so forth. And so much for the Russian government being against Islamic extremism, when Chechnya is a fairly Islamic extremist state, where gays are killed and so on. Kadyrov claims there are no gays in his country. Their prayer call doesn't bother me. Alcohol is forbidden. Women have to cover their hair and so forth. What's the next thing? So, fearing for his life, in 2000, people were trying to kill him. Some of his colleagues who felt he was a traitor. He'd held press conferences. Litvinenko showed his face and said all this is going on. And Berezovsky couldn't protect him anymore. Berezovsky had actually been very close to Putin. And obviously it's very embarrassing for both Putin and Berezovsky to remember this. They were actually thick as thieves in the early days. Berezovsky, this billionaire, he was also an Israeli citizen because he was Jewish, but he came to live in the United Kingdom. His daughters both gone to Cambridge in the early 90s. So Litvinenko, he was arrested, he was in prison on remand, he was released. He decided he needed to get out of the country. So what he did is there was a list who was not allowed to leave the country. He went to Georgia and he'd bribed some police officer not to inspect his passport, so he went by ship because otherwise he would see us on a banned list. Went by ferry, I think it was to Georgia, and then to Turkey and blah blah blah. And he offered his services to the United States Embassy in Ankara. They said we're not going to touch him. He went to the British Embassy. The United Kingdom said yes, we'll help you. So they flew him out to the UK. But what about his wife and child? Well, they flew to Spain, bought a return ticket, pretending they're going on holiday. They obviously went to the British authorities there, and the British authorities flew them to the United Kingdom. The family was reunited. So they lived here on a stipend. They met Berezovsky. Berezovsky was paying Litvinenko. This is living in London, in the north of the city, and that was that. And Litvinenko carried on saying things that the Russian government found highly disobliging. There was another bloke in the FSB, Andrei Lugovoy. So Lugovoy is a Russian, though born in Azerbaijan, and he's very chauvinistic. But anyway, he came here, he met Litvinenko, he befriended him, and Litvinenko trusted him, and they tried to set up some intelligence business, selling intelligence to various people. But anyway, not terribly successful for them. Litvinenko never learnt much English, though his wife did. She's still very much alive. So then he became a British citizen in 2006. Just days earlier, Anna Politkovskaya, that campaigning journalist, was shot dead in Moscow in her apartment building. The killer has never been caught. Now, her handbag wasn't stolen. No one's got any other motive like a personal grudge. There's no sexual motive, so far as we can tell. The only reason anyone would want to kill her is because of her journalism said things which were highly disobliging to the Russian government. And so she told the truth without fear, without favor about the Chechen conflict, reporting the crimes committed by both sides. She was accused by many nationalists of being in favor of the Chechen insurgents. He said that's not true, nor am I against them. I report the truth. That's what journalists do. and there'd been a previous attempt to poison her when she drank tea on a plane, been rushed to hospital. So that was that she was killed. People had urged her to leave the country, but she refused to do so. So Litvinenko was here in London, and he met Andrei Lugovoy here in what was then the Millennium Hotel. They went to the bar, and they suggested that he would like to drink an alcoholic beverage. And Litvinenko declined. He was teetotal by that stage. They knew that he wouldn't drink any alcohol, and they were having some alcoholic drinks. Mr. Lugovoy and another man, who is presumed to be a Russian man, we don't actually know. The third man at that meeting has never been identified. There was Andrei Lugovoy, there was Alexander Litvinenko, and there was a third man. Anyway, they were speaking Russian though, because they were overheard by many people. What's the next step? So they had their drink, and after a few minutes they went their separate ways. And that evening, that's when Litvinenko fell ill. Now Lugovoy and his companion left the country within hours. They flew to Russia. So the British police, they searched Lugovoy's hotel room. They found some of this poisonous substance in the sink, where presumably poured it down the drain. There'd been an early attempt to poison Litvinenko a few days before, but hadn't worked. And it was found, traces of it were found on the plane that flew him back to Moscow, and on and on and on. There's all this evidence. So the British police said they would like to speak to Mr. Litvinenko in relation to this. They believe that they could help him with their inquiries. Now, he has refused to be interviewed by them. He has gone on television and saying in English, "I did not kill." He is a member of the Russian parliament for the United Russia Party. That is the main pro-Putin party, and on and on. He's received various honors. He was a friend of Boris Berezovsky. We all know that Berezovsky died in his residence, well, committed suicide in his residence some years later. Now, Berezovsky, he just lost a major court case to Roman Abramovich, another very prominent member of the Russian community resident in the United Kingdom. But why would Berezovsky commit suicide? Okay, he was in his 60s, he was in good health, he was married, he had children, he had a lot going for him, but okay, he wasn't as rich as he previously was. Why would he top himself? Odd. And I know where he lived, not the actual house. I know the gated community that he lived in, and security was there superb. You would not be able to get in, kill someone, and get out without being noticed. If it was murder, it was an inside job. But the British police concluded that it really was suicide. Hey, it might have been suicide. So that is Alexander Litvinenko, where he was poisoned. Now, I don't know who killed him, but you know, I can hazard a fairly good guess who killed him. Who had the motive and the opportunity and the means? Who would have access to this? He was buried in this sort of lead coffin because of the polonium-210 in there. Obviously the Russian state has carried out all sorts of hits abroad, a wet operation, and the people who poisoned him, they knew what they were doing. Because if they'd given him a dose too high, he would have immediately collapsed and gone into paroxysms. If they gave him a dose that was too low, he wouldn't have died. A bit like Sergei Skripal and his daughter. Okay, so that is the Millennium Hotel. Goodbye.